And I think that, unfortunately, that regime libertarians or beltway libertarians who have done good work in the past have become so toxically poisoned by a form of Trump Derangement Syndrome, which renders them unable to provide a meaningful antiseptic to the toxicity within the libertarian movement writ large, and which I think is part of the reason it's that we're dying. Is I think people look at the libertarians in the United States and think we are quite unreasonable and unfit to govern, and to a large extent, not entirely, but to a large extent, they're right.
Petersen, thank you so much for joining me. I'm used to coming on your show, so this is very strange for me. Like, the roles have all been reversed, so I'm glad to have you on. I think the timing is perfect. We're recording this on Thursday. This is going to be out on Friday. But you had an article, a column, I would say, coming out on the tablet today that I think everyone should go and read. It's titled "Hitler is Back in Style." And I wanted to read just one paragraph from it, and then I want you just to take the reins and take us through this argument that you're making, that I think is a really important one. So if you don't mind me quoting your work back at you, which I know people always love, the strange new sympathy for tyrants, the contempt for Israel, the obsession with power hierarchies, all stem from a single contagion, the Howard Zinification of the liberty movement. Zinn reduced history to a morality play of oppressors and oppressed. Today's populist libertarian pundits do the same. Every bomb is a war crime. Every Western leader is a colonialist. Every Israeli soldier a Nazi. It's not foreign policy, it's theology. Awesome, just awesome paragraph right there. Just take it away. What pushed you to write this?
Well, ever since October 7th, the type of dialogue that had been going on in the libertarian movement in the amongst liberty communities that was more underground really burst out into the open when I saw that people were unironically supporting Hamas murdering Israeli civilians at the music festival. But it wasn't something that was uncharacteristic, knowing what I knew about people who run in liberty circles, because me having been in politics now for about 17 years, way back at the beginning of my political career, I would run into people for whom it wasn't necessarily that the ideology overlapped itself, because libertarianism itself, classical liberalism, minarchism, limited government, is the antithesis of National Socialism. But because the conspiracy theories were the same, there was an overlap between these two groups. And so I set out to detail in this article at Tablet Mag the sort of timeline of what people used to make fun of, which was called a libertarian to alt-right pipeline, which very much is real and does exist and has happened. And I cite cases and sources of this occurring, which, of course, I find anathema to the Enlightenment, classical, liberal, limited government ideals that I hold. But the conspiracy theories were really where everything meshed, because, of course, libertarians, we hate the Federal Reserve. We despise the central banks, not necessarily just because of the secrecy, but that's part of it, but because of our arguments on monetary policy and of decentralization. But there is an entire group of people for whom their disgust for the Federal Reserve is rooted in conspiracies such as Henry Ford would have been comfortable with, right? Advancing the idea of Jewish bankers and of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. A lot of these conspiracy theories, which have been around now for centuries, find a home today amongst libertarians because the hatred for the Fed creates an odd bedfellows effect, right? So that's really what I'm trying to do, which is to sort of chronicle where there's an overlap, where it might come from, and to show how today, one of the reasons why you see so many pundits, popular pundits like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens coming out, platforming 9/11 truthers, saying the moon landing is a hoax, is because the conspiracy brain has been allowed to fester. There's a reason why Tucker Carlson talked hate towards Bill Buckley. There was a high-level discussion that happened between Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith, where they both talked about how Buckley was one of the most awful, horrible figures of the conservative movement because he was a gatekeeper. which is an interesting thing to despise him for, because of course Tucker Carlson has played gatekeeper from the beginning of from the days that he was interviewing Britney Spears about Pepsi to today. Tucker Carlson has been a trendsetter on the right, deciding which opinions are allowed and which opinions are not allowed. And now today he plays gatekeeper, but just in the opposite direction against everything that he stood for before. He now stands against, because of course the masses being unpoliced to such a large degree that even my damn near anarchist heart has to sit back and say, well, maybe a little gatekeeping is fine. Mm-hmm. And this is the discussion we're having on the right. How is it? Are there no enemies to the right? Or can we say perhaps that if people who consider themselves to be Hitler admirers or fans or National Socialists or legitimate, agreeers with Osama bin Laden or Hamas, perhaps we do have enemies that are standing right next to us, and that really should not be tolerated as part of a coalition that seeks to govern the United States, rather than to just get clicks online mm-hmm. and be really popular, because we're all sort of looking for the next big conspiracy podcaster who this time really is going to prove that the protocols of the learned elders of Zion were correct. And maybe Henry Ford shouldn't have apologized for it at the end of his life, after he realized that it was a hoax as well. Maybe we should sit around the campfire and debate the USS Liberty and whether it was deliberate or an accident. Maybe we should revisit all of those things that have been revisited many, many times, and many of the things taught in even middle school to high school history classes, which if people like Candace Owens were paying attention to, then they would have known about things like the bombings of Dresden and the fire bombings of Tokyo in comparison to the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If they knew the amount of people that were killed in the fire bombings of Tokyo under Curtis LeMay versus the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they might have, if they had a sense of scope of history, they might be able to understand how ridiculous most of these conspiracy theories are. Which is not to say that there aren't real conspiracies, which is not to say that conspiracies for evil don't exist. They absolutely do, and many of them are practiced openly. Mm-hmm. And yet there's a conspiracy brain that is dominant, and it is incapable of reason, and it is always making type 1 errors, which are the type of error which is that every rustle in the grass is a tiger. Mm-hmm. But I have to, in order to be humble and intellectually honest, I have to say, to some extent, of course, that there are type 2 errors where people like myself hear the rustle in the grass and there is a tiger, and of course we get eaten, which is probably the evolutionary basis for why there are very few rational, skeptical type 2 thinkers, non-conspiracy thinkers, because people like myself did get eaten. Whereas the conspiracy brains, by being frightened of everything and seeing mm-hmm. red flags and tigers everywhere, were constantly on flight, and therefore they were able to multiply in greater numbers. All this to say, essentially, that conspiracy brain rules the right, and reason and logic and principle really is lost in the milieu of paranoid schizophrenia.
It's been really concerning. I mean, you and I have been speaking about this before October 7th. I think October 7th became what many people saw as a tipping point, but really it was just a moment that opened an already open door a lot wider than it was. Like, we were talking about this when Kanye West was spewing a lot of really blatantly anti-Semitic stuff, and people like Candace Owens were still circling him like parasites because he's a billionaire, and there are also a lot of business opportunities when you're around a billionaire. But when you actually get to these conspiracies that are taking root, what has been your experience of the pushback? Because a lot of the I'm not a libertarian, a lot of the libertarians I see who are engaging in a lot of this stuff, some of it I think is ignorance, some of it is just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Sometimes I think it's just to be edgy. I think there's a lot of that, especially with younger people online. There's just an enjoyment of being edgy. I think that's what that infamous text feed that got exposed by Politico was kind of evidence of. I'm one of those people that think it was bad, but I'm not going to fall over myself, going beyond that. What's your experience, though, being a member of the libertarian movement and pushing back against these things in the way that I appreciate you doing so?
Not good.
Because yeah.
If there's $7,000 out there on offer for the views that I already hold, please get in touch. No, there really isn't a lot. It's like a cult or a religion. If you're a heretic, right, to some extent, you know how you'll be treated. If you're a new convert, if you're a new believer, of course, you're lauded up and lifted up and placed at the front of the line for everything. It's kind of like, you see this though in many ways. It's like the OnlyFans model Nala, who went from doing pornography to all of a sudden, she's a Christian influencer, and now she's headlining conferences and things. Religions, cults, whatever they may be, they all love the newly converted, and they despise a heretic. I mean, look how Islam treats apostasy. They assassinate you. You've seen this with Walter Block, a perfect example, writer at the Mises Institute, longtime anarcho-capitalist leader and purveyor of libertarian thought, acolyte of Murray Rothbard, now persona non grata amongst the Mises Institute and amongst the libertarian movement writ large because of his defense of Israel. His Jewishness, I think, comes into play. And by extension, attacks on people like Javier Milei, the most successful libertarian in all of world history. Javier Milei, because of his fondness for Western civilization in the United States and Israel. And personally, for myself, not being a Walter Block or Javier Milei level of personality, I pay a very heavy price for the things that I say. It is substantive, and because the lies cost you nothing, but the truth costs, and you pay a price when you tell the truth. And that's why I think so many of these influencers that we see, the ones that really blow up, the biggest liars, of course, tend to blow up. It's sort of like a Bernie Sanders effect, if you will, right? Whereas ours is a form of conspiracy theory socialism, which has emerged on the right. With Bernie Sanders, it's a conspiracy theory communism to a great extent. The bigger the liars that there are on the left, the more they rise up, because that, of course, is their culture. And this has creeped into the right now as well, as we've seen, many 1990s style Democrats moving into the Republican Party. The QAnon movement, the conspiracy brain has spread, and it runs unchecked. It's a woke mind virus. It's a version of the woke mind virus. And I've had a lot of people who roll their eyes when I say that. But when you read my piece at Tablet Magazine, I very clearly am pointing to this foreign policy that libertarians have adopted as a zinification of the liberty movement. Whereas what is the functional difference or the political differences between, say, a member of Antifa who is free, pro-Palestine, and a libertarian who suggests that Osama bin Laden made a lot of good points, and that he attacked us in 9/11 as a justified act of self-defense because of American imperialism. What's the political differences there between communists and libertarians then on foreign policy? There isn't a lot. There's a lot of overlap, but also there's a lot of, like you had stated there is a lot of praising of dictators. And there is a lot of, defense of Putin's intervention. See, I had made the mistake, Ian, of thinking that we should consistently apply libertarian ideals when it came to non-intervention.
What a fool.
So that you can find articles from back in 2000 and perhaps 11 or maybe 2013, from Ron Paul's Institute of Foreign Policy attacking me because I was supporting libertarians in Ukraine who had their country intervened upon by an imperialist foreign power. It was the epitome of everything that libertarians had been campaigning since 2008. Ron Paul, when I got in, a giant government intervening into a society with a military intervention. I was like, wow, this is a classic case of libertarianism standing up for libertarian ideals. But when I stood up and said, hey, Vladimir Putin goes too far, that was really one of the big moments now I had been sending up flares to people like yourself, hopefully for you to see and for others to see about what was going on. I'd been sending up flares for years, but in 2013, when I wrote I won't say unkind word towards Ron Paul necessarily, but when I just said that I don't think that Ron Paul hates America, but I think that this strange Putinist rhetoric sounds like he does, it didn't matter. Of course, they don't. They take it, what you say, out of context, and they say that you said that Ron Paul hates America, even if you did not. What you said was this rhetoric. Sure, it's no wonder other people are confused about what libertarians feel about foreign policy when they hear things like this. Because for years I had defended us against neocons who were saying that libertarians are isolationists. Some of them are Putinists. They're in bed with the terrorists. They're making arguments in favor of the terrorism, because that was the favorite thing through the Bush years. You know, you're either with us or the terrorists, and the libertarians, of course, rejecting this dichotomy. That they were that I was at that point. I said to myself, I understand why people think that about us now. I understand why people think that. And then I realized that it wasn't just ironic. It was in 2013. I realized, oh, this really is a stance against the United States and Israel. They share a special hatred for Israel. And therefore, anything that the U.S. or Israel does is always the wrong thing, always the bad thing. We are always the aggressor. And this is how I get to my argument that this is. So there are woke left. There's a woke left. And I think there's a woke right. There are woke left libertarians, and there are woke right libertarians. And these are people who accept the structural beliefs of Howard Zinn's view of foreign policy and of the United States, of Columbus as an evil slave, genocidal, slave-owning murderer, rather than for the person for whom we wouldn't have the ability to say that speak. Right. So there's a hatred even of Thomas Jefferson and of George Washington, strangely enough. And a lot of it comes down to questions about the Whiskey Rebellion. But it's like what I think it was Richard Hanania wrote about this based ritual. It's about who's more libertarian. So we're all competing to out libertarian each other in a way. So it's like, well, Osama bin Laden wrote in his letters that it was the United States' support for Israel that one of the primary reasons that they attacked us. And so libertarians, of course, leaped on that and said, well, then the answer to that, of course, is that we shouldn't support Israel. Yeah, it's a little more complex than that, actually. You can't just boil it down. There were quite a few things that Osama bin Laden wrote about the reasons why he attacked us. One of the reasons is because we have women's rights in this country, and other reasons as well for things that we would roundly reject if he said that's why he attacked us from. But it's all in service of an ideology, Ian. It's just, rather than look at the world as it is, as I try and do, I just see the world as it is, and then I get my libertarian lens. Everything must be filtered through a very specific and cascading in importance libertarian view of things, which is based on a purist style of thinking that has, I think, unfortunately led to a form of intellectual inbreeding, where you get people, they're not even curious anymore. Like I speak to libertarians quite frequently, and they're very incurious, very closed-minded. I was giving a speech in Colorado last weekend in the Libertarian Party of Colorado, and all the anarchists refused to see my speech. They walked out before I would speak because I was going to speak about an idea called libertarian nationalism. And this is the kind of thing, I mean, at least maybe the leftists would have the balls, Ian, to look me in the eyes and boo me, or even maybe take a shot at me. but the libertarians themselves, they just can't even hear new ideas. So when they hear me talking like how I'm talking right now, it's traitor, disgusting, Austin, what a waste, what a failure, what a terrible, miserable person you must be. But I actually feel that it's actually me who's the who's making sense, and they're all insane. So but I don't know, Ian, if it was you. I know for sure I was speaking to a guy, he goes by the moniker Pew Pew Jew. And I asked him if he was concerned. This was a couple of years ago. I asked him if he was concerned on my podcast about the rise of anti-Semitism, and we're seeing it more on the right. And I know at the time that he had said, no, it's off. It's all the time. We're used to it. It's no thing. This might've been before October 7th. And he's like, no, it's not an issue. And I'm kind of like, not agreeing with him, but trying to be respectful. I'm not Jewish after all. But I don't know if you and I had that conversation. I might have asked you that. And did you give me the same answer? Have you seen the same things I'm not supposed to be interviewing you, I understand, but
That's okay.
wonder, did you see this before October 7th? What I've been, the rabbit trail, did you find some of my crumbs I was leaving?
Yeah,
Or
absolutely. I mean,
flares?
I'm not one of the people out there who's just going to say it's fine, because it's not fine. I think that's also a criticism I have, to use that phrase people love, as a Jew, of a lot of other Jews out there who are almost have found this level of comfort in a sense of sort of stagnant victimhood. So we accept a level of constant victimization that, as long as it's not as bad as the Holocaust, there's a really great book out there, People Love Dead Jews. You should read it. It makes essentially the argument that people love Jews being killed, but they hate Jews defending themselves. But also, because the Holocaust was so terrible, everything that is not the Holocaust therefore isn't that bad, which of course is an insane argument. So I think there's a lot of Jews out there who are used to this. But I was very concerned. I was very concerned by the anti-Semitism on the left, obviously. But I think this brings us back to this debate we're having about the no enemies on the right stuff. I was more concerned about anti-Semitism on the right, not because I necessarily thought in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 that it was worse than anti-Semitism on the left. But I think it was scarier, one, because it's the movement that I care about. And so hating leftists, whether they're anti-Semitic or not, doesn't really change my view of them. But I think it's antithetical to the movement that I am a part of. I think anti-Semitism is antithetical to a lot of the things that we claim to be fighting for. And so when I see very high-profile people like Candace Owens who are just embracing this stuff, and then it just went overboard after October 7th, I'm deeply concerned. I continue to be deeply concerned. I think that's why the no enemies to the right stuff is so insanely stupid, because I think it's either evil or it's rooted in something that is so ignorant, where if you are not personally facing those threats and the only threats you're facing are from the left, you're just pretending as if there are no threats on the right, which you have to, the only way you can get to that point is by not opening your eyes, not seeing what's going on, and showing zero empathy for the people you claim to be on your side. So I've been deeply concerned for a while. That's not to say I'm, lighting the roof on fire and saying that this is, a United 93 moment, anything like that, because there are degrees to which we should panic over things. But I think it's something we should constantly be worrying about, because you constantly need to be weeding your garden. Otherwise, you're going to go away for a few weeks, come back, and you can't even see your garden anymore.
And that's what I was saying about Tucker Carlson, right? He was once a Buckleyite gatekeeper, and now we've derided the ideas of gatekeeper. And part of this are things like the breakdown in trust of institutions. So, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, gave people rightly a suspicion of the institutions of the United States, whether they be government institutions or non-government institutions, because nobody really knew what was going on. And so we were all looking to see who was going to be on the right side of history for that. And I think that largely libertarians, classical liberals, conservatives, right-wingers, right-wing populists, MAGA types, Trump supporters were mostly on the right side of history when it came to that. But once we got past the pandemic and we had sort of leveled the playing field when it came to whose expert opinion we would be trusting or not, we find ourselves in a situation where I'm supposed to take seriously a debate between Joe Rogan and Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, and I'm supposed to take seriously the argument that I don't have to have been there to understand things. I mean, it's a very, I can see why someone with an intelligence level of about your average freshman high schooler would probably, of which probably a lot of people on the internet are at that age, right? Not the high schooler's fault for freshmen for being a freshman and for falling for an argument like that. But to think that someone like Douglas Murray, who had been there many times, had traveled there multiple times, that his actual real life experiences that he had, that they wouldn't give him perhaps more credibility on a subject, even that I'm supposed to take it seriously, that it's like you can just read news blogs from home and really get a sense for the profound depth of the conflict that we're engaged in. But then, of course, others would argue, they would say, well, he also went on like the Israeli tour. He didn't do the Vice magazine go with the Taliban tour, which I will admit that going on that tour If you went there without the Israeli government's, I wouldn't recommend it, without their defense, then I think that might even give you more credibility to have an opinion on things. But Dave Smith hadn't done that. And all that does is say then that expertise does matter. Expertise does mean something, which means that, people who, if they Vice magazined it, if they actually got in with Hamas and were able to go tour the tunnels and got cameras in there and didn't have the defense of the Israeli government to do it, congratulations. I mean, what an amazing job you've done. You've done a great job as a scoop as a reporter. But what we're supposed to do now is to take seriously the musings of the college hoodie class versus the class of people on the front lines, the people who are there experiencing. Everybody should have the freedom to put in their body what they like if they're a consenting adult, right? But when it comes to whether or not I'm going to listen to my doctor's advice for my health versus a person online who says I should drink colloidal silver, right? If someone's a pastor or minister selling colloidal silver, I'm probably going to go with my doctor over that one. I'm not saying you should always trust the experts, but in certain cases, in certain scenarios and situations, I think expertise and experience, it should add a little bit more weight to a discussion. But the reason why these people want to level the playing field, of course, is they have no experience other than that. They have no life experience that has taken them to the front lines of a conflict to allow them to report. Not to say that there aren't people who agree with Dave or with Joe Rogan that have been to the front lines and they see something differently. There certainly are. But they have more credibility on the subject even than a Dave Smith or a Joe Rogan, who live in ideological bubbles. And Joe, I'm sure, lives in a compound and would never go there, even with Israeli military beliefs. So I'm not an egalitarian, Ian, and we live in an age of populism. I'm an elitist in an age of populists. There's a lot of things that I think that the elite in the United States get wrong and need to be brought low about. But when it comes to knowledge and experience and expertise, when it comes to things like medicine or foreign policy or things like that, I'm not listening to podcasters' advice when it comes to their views. Right? It's a simple factor of, if I can't know everything all at once and I can't go there myself, I have to try and find the best examples that I can to use for knowledge. And quite frankly, what we have, at least representing us to a large degree amongst libertarians and conservatives and right wingers, is that instead of the cream rising to the crop, it's the shit rising to the top, floating to the top. And it's a shame, because libertarianism has an intellectual tradition that is much broader than what's portrayed, because the signal boosting that goes on, I think, from other countries for the fringe radicals here is probably playing a role in all of this. But also, I think that the masses in the United States, they have egalitarian impulses, which I think are really wrongheaded. And I think a more hierarchical view of society is probably a wise one. And it's certainly much more in line with Ayn Rand's views of the elite, which is who is John Galt is all about. Right? There's a reason why she wrote about the man who stopped the motor of the world, because the country was consuming everything, every resource it could, including consuming everything that was being created by all the builders of society. It was an elitist book, and it's certainly something that I identify with. I identify much more with Ayn Rand, I think, now, even more than I used to. And of course, Ayn Rand was deeply pro-Israel. So for me, it's a civilizational struggle. It's a matter of civilization versus barbarism. And the left, of course, they want to make it all. This is why they don't want to celebrate Columbus Day. They want to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. Right? They want to destroy our statues. They want to tear down the icons of Western civilization, right? And maybe it's for different reasons than the libertarians, but the goals are the same. If your reasons for wanting to the reasons for wanting to commit cultural vandalism are different, but the outcomes are the same, what's the difference? Who cares why someone believes something if their end goal at the end is the destruction of icons of Western civilization like Winston Churchill or Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan or and name any other hero of Western civilization, and you will always find some whether it's a Hitlerite
Mm-hmm.
view of World War II or just a conspiracy brain view of these people, you'll always find malcontents and discontent and stomach ache
Yeah.
from them when it comes to Western civilization and its icons. And I am a nationalist. I am an American nationalist, and I do believe in America first, not Israel first.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in America first. And it's purely, I think that my defense of Israel is seeing Israel as, and this is quite callous, Ian, but I see Israel as a shield defending Americans. They're human shields in a way. It's sort of sad that Israel has to perform the role that has to. I pity them because Israel's surrounded by enemies. It was the United States, and there were 20, and we started our country in 1789, and there were 22 hostile Arab nations around us. Those hostile Arab nations wouldn't exist anymore because we would have destroyed every one of them and turned them into states. Yeah. The expansionist American view, the view of that was of pioneers who conquered the West and fought the indigenous peoples and established this nation, didn't share the foreign policy views of American libertarians. They were expansionists. They were conquistadors from England and from Germany and from Scotland and from Ireland that founded this country and did so. They forged it out of iron and blood. And it's a shame that there really isn't actually a lot of, other than perhaps yourself, Ian, and a few others, there's actually really not a lot of interest in this conversation that I am deeply fascinated and interested in. So I struggle to find worthy, not just foils, people to argue against, but people to discuss these issues with. But now I think, unfortunately, the situation has become dire to some extent that people like Tablet Magazine and yourself are reaching out to hear my point of view because I've been there.
Yeah. What I find really interesting is I think you touched on a lot that I want to unpack. What I find really interesting is I think there's a valid pursuit of knowledge. There's a valid pursuit of understanding within an audience. I think there are a lot of people out there who want to hear well-formed points of view that maybe aren't either the contemporary or the mainstream or whatever it is. They want to hear different points of view. And so they seek out platforms like Joe Rogan and they hear guests like Dave Smith. And I think there's quite often a tendency, I think this is more true in America than my experience in Europe. If you hear someone who speaks confidently and quickly and throws a lot of what feels like information at you, I think our brains short circuit and assume they're correct, assume they're well-resourced, assume they're well-intentioned, and assume they're correct. But if you come along and one day they're talking on a topic that you actually know quite deeply about, you have this sudden realization that they do not know what they are saying. I think Dave Smith is one of those examples where he talks very passionately on issues. He quotes an awful lot of books. Those apparently are experts he's quite happy to trust. But then if you actually listen to what he's saying, it's logical fallacy after logical fallacy. It's self-contradiction after self-contradiction. And it's just a lot of him dismissing an argument by hopping to a different argument. I don't think that's knowledge to me. I think it's perfectly reasonable for him to disagree with Douglas Murray and to say that you do not have to have been somewhere to have an opinion on it. That's all true. But that doesn't mean that Douglas Murray is therefore part of the conspiracy because he's only seen what he's been allowed to see, when the opposite is not true. If someone was shown around by Hamas, would Dave Smith see that with the same skepticism that sees someone like Douglas Murray? I don't think he would. I think that's the problem. It's fine to have distrust in any expertise you have out there, but you have to apply it equally. And that's not what I see. Looking at this movement from the outside, where I see these sort of libertarians make this anti-Israel movement, I see them putting a lot of distrust into the Israeli government, which is fine. They're politicians, whether they're Jewish or not, Israeli or not, doesn't really matter. You can distrust politicians. But then they will take the words of an organization like Hamas and just assume it's all true. And no one will even scratch their head and think, can I trust Osama bin Laden's word? The fact that he wrote a letter justifying the 9/11 attacks, can we just assume that's all valid? Of course we can't, but they do, and that's what I do not get.
Yes, you nailed it. The bias is very clear. I mean, I have a bias. I have a bias towards liberty and individualism and Western civilization, and I'm open about the bias. But I think the thing is with Dave and with some others of the libertarian ilk is that they kind of pretend to a sort of neutrality, which gives them what, you know, the sort of moral clout that they feel they need to make pronouncements such as there should be a two-state solution. My understanding of Dave Smith's ideology was that he was an anarcho-capitalist. So I find, you know, it interesting that you can make an exception to create a brand new nation state as an anarcho-capitalist, but you can't defend Israel, even though it holds to some extent Enlightenment values compared to its opponents in the Middle East. But it's because, and I know that this isn't going to sound like a good excuse or a good reason, but it is all in service to Murray Rothbard and the cult of Murray Rothbard around him, which was to a great extent, and I'm an admirer of Rothbard to an extent. It was a Rothbardian cult of foreign policy, which was so strictly non-interventionist as to, in my opinion, to be isolationist. I'm not saying that pejoratively, just descriptively. And so it becomes like the base ritual. Everybody wants to be on with Rothbard's cult and his inner circle. Everybody wants to feel like an heir to this man. Even Javier Milei quotes him fondly. He did just this last week, even though Walter Block, for example, the Jewish professor who was excommunicated from Mises, I don't think that he was lying when he said a couple of weeks ago that he thought that Murray Rothbard would have loved Javier Milei, but he was definitely wrong because Murray Rothbard despised Israel. And to a large extent, the United States war machine. People would say, let's have a distinction between a nation and a state and a government. I understand. There's a longer discussion to have there, right? If we had hours and hours and hours to have these discussions, I could really give you the microanalysis of who, what, when, where, and why on this. But you're just going to have to trust me to an extent that it's about it. It really is more of a popular kids club. Who's the closest to Hans Hermann Hoppe and Murray Rothbard? And if you don't adhere to it, then you are excommunicated. So Russell Kirk, he was a famous conservative writer. He called libertarians chirping sectaries, and we are. There are around 10 different schools of thought amongst libertarianism. But after Ron Paul stepped down, most libertarians either quit politics entirely or were so disenfranchised by Ron Paul's loss that they embraced a Rothbardian anarchism, which is an anti-statism that is to the exclusion of minarchism, classical liberalism, constitutionalism, objectivism even, and everyone became a neocon. You were either a Rothbardian anarchist or you're a neocon. And socialism is everything that the government does. It's a very black and white binary thinking sort of a way. But where nuance suddenly becomes involved is when Russia is doing it, or when nuance is suddenly involved is when Israel is attacked and defending itself. And then at that time we claim to be neutral, but then we're really supporting the other side because all of the grumblings and papers and all of the evidence that's piled up, thousands and thousands of pages high from the Ron Paul Institute of Foreign Policy is all very Putinist, very Putin friendly. There's a reason why Russia today loves to platform people like Daniel McAdams and Scott Horton and others from antiwar.com. It's everything that they say is in service to the Kremlin's propaganda outlets. And this is because there's a culture amongst libertarians of, they call it the Rockwell rule, which is you must never take an opinion that also coincides with what the CIA believes. So if the CIA believes something, then you must take the opposite view on it. In other words, it's anti-intellectualism because it's like when people say Hitler drank water. Therefore, if the water must be bad, don't drink it. It's awful for you, right? It's an anti-intellectualism. It's the conspiracy brain. It's a popularity contest with conspiracy brain, with a complete engorgement of propaganda from America's enemies and opponents around the world, and it just brain dead, much of it. And some of it has to do with the fact that libertarians really just love drugs.
It always comes down
Cue
to
the
that.
applause line
Oh,
and the
always
laughter.
comes down to that. Huh? It's like just give heroin left, right, and center. Everything will be better.
Heroin to 5-year-olds. Yes, exactly. Yes, but then what gets lost is the beautiful philosophy of that Ayn Rand created. What gets lost is the beautiful philosophy of liberty. What gets lost is Mises. Lost in this Rothbardian milieu is Mises, Hayek, and others who founded, and Milton Friedman, who were not anarchists, and who made incredible contributions to the world in their lives to the cause of liberty. And all of that is lost. And even I think that the what you might say, this is really where I'm going to lose I'm going to lose my house over this. But I think even like I would call the regime libertarians. I think even to a large extent, although not entirely, I still read some of them over at Reason Magazine and the Cato Institute. Their brains have been so broken by Trump Derangement Syndrome that they cannot provide a meaningful counter to the conspiracy brain. So the institutions of liberty in Washington, D.C. have been defenestrated, and in large part due to their own making, because of their inability to see forest for trees. It's kind of like this, to some extent, I think, misguided war of Thomas Massie against Donald Trump. You can say you picked it, that Trump picked the fight all day long, but you're going to lose that fight. I mean, Massie might remain in office, but he'll never pass the Prime Act, and therefore our principles will never go forward. So all we're really doing is paying and fighting for a politician who will sit in office and do nothing for our ideals, other than just preach about them, which if you like that, that's great, but it's not really the job of a congressman. So it's unfortunate. There's a time in a battle when you have to sort of decide which way you're going to go. And I think that, unfortunately, that regime libertarians or beltway libertarians who have done good work in the past have become so toxically what's the word I'm looking for? Just poisoned by a form of Trump derangement syndrome, which renders them unable to provide a meaningful antiseptic to the toxicity within the libertarian movement writ large, and which I think is part of the reason that we're dying. Is I think people look at the libertarians in the United States and think we are quite unreasonable and unfit to govern, and to a large extent, not entirely, but to a large extent, they're right.
What are your thoughts on Thomas Massie in the context of the Israel anti-Semitism stuff? Because a lot of the criticisms I see sometimes are valid. Like I don't really pay much attention to him because my politics don't align with his in almost every way. But I have a lot of close friends who are involved in Israel advocacy, anti-Semitism, opposition, things like that, who despise him. And when I go onto his social media, quite often I just see this kind of almost pathetic bitchiness where he's just obsessed about AIPAC. Every one of his enemies is AIPAC funded, blah, blah, blah. And so that's kind of the impression I get of him, is just like kind of just whining about something that may or may not be the case. But I would love to hear your opinion as someone who is perhaps motivated more by some of his views.
It's distressing. I mean, I really am a big Thomas Massie fan. I still am. And obviously, because I don't live and breathe the Israel issue, it's not my top number one issue. It's not like the most urgency that he's warring with AIPAC. But I think that it's become a series of tit for tat escalations on their sides. I mean, it makes perfect sense why Massie is attacking AIPAC, because they've attacked him, and they're working to elect someone other than him. He has to fight them. There's no question about it. But how he fights them, I guess, really is the question. And I actually don't care for some of the rhetoric that I'm hearing from him in regards to how he's attacking Trump for wanting to import Argentine beef. Some of the stuff that I've heard from Thomas Massie in recent years has been a little more protectionist than really I'm comfortable with. I consider myself to be a MAGA supporter. I'm wearing the MAGA hat right now, but I don't agree with everything of the MAGA agenda. And I believe in the idea of the liberalization of trade, especially with our allies, people like Argentina and others. If that benefits us and benefits them at the same time, that's a win-win. But I think that it's unfortunate that libertarians don't see how important a role they could play in the Trump administration. I think that the fact that libertarians were angry that Trump did not appoint a libertarian to his cabinet. But I don't think that that is Trump's fault, because I don't think that there's anyone credible enough who could pass a Senate hearing. If if you said that you thought 9/11 was an inside job or that there were dancing Israelis, you're probably not going to pass a Senate hearing review.
At least for a few years.
At least for a few years, until the Democrats are back in charge again, and then, but then we won't be able to appoint anyone. So, no, I think that, again, intransigence, and then also just a lack of understanding for how the game works. I mean, when I was a Ron Paul kid in 2008, I had no idea how primaries or caucuses worked to elect a president. And we got squashed in 2008. We blamed it on the establishment. We blamed it on the regime. But it was really that we just didn't display the kind of competence or excellence that's required to advance in American politics. It's not just about votes. It's about a person's ties to their community and what they have to offer their community, not just what they can get from the federal government in terms of pork belly spending and earmarks and bring that home, but also are libertarians embedded in the community? Are they really speaking to the issues that their voters care about? And how can those coincide with libertarian views? I don't know. Now, Massie seems to have pulled it off. Of course, he came to power during the Tea Party years. So did he and Rand Paul. And we'd lost Justin Amash, who had come in with the Tea Party tidal wave. We had 3, maybe you could have said 5. Mike Lee and Ted Cruz were libertarian adjacent, while not identifying as such. Ted Cruz making a lot more sense these days to be, from what I'm hearing, surprisingly enough. But I think they say that because of his Zionism is due to his religion, and that's probably partially true. My belief in the defense of the Jewish state morally comes from a national defense perspective of the United States and of one of shared common Western values. But in regards to where the Thomas Massie thing is going, it was sort of inevitable that it would come to this, because the crowds are responding positively and they're giving him a lot of money. There's a lot of money to be made in hating AIPAC. Shockingly, despite all the anti-Semitic and Jew hating and AIPAC hating people all say, there's not a lot of money or fame or support in supporting Jews. You would think that if they controlled Hollywood, if they controlled the media, if they controlled the legacy media, that they would be taking me and running me out there on CNN all day, every day to say these things, or Fox or whatever. There really isn't, actually. The tides are turning. I think that actually probably it's more dangerous to be a Jew now than it has been at any point since World War II. And I think October 7th proved that. And I think that the fact that 1 billion Muslims or 2 billion Muslims in the world exist and are now online, just the sheer numerical superiority. Bodies are policy. The number of people in your nation will affect the outcome of political confrontations and conflicts.
Just look at the UK.
One of the reasons, exactly. One of the reasons why China is so powerful is not because of their economy or advanced technology. Those are part of it, but it's because they have the sheer numbers. And so if there are 2 billion Muslims in this world and they are committed to a fight against, how many Jews are there, Ian?
Not many, like 16, 17 million, I think, last time I looked.
16 or 17 million versus 2 billion Muslims. Deep shit. It's not a good time to be a Jewish person. And I feel for the Jewish people, and I feel for them. I have Jewish family members, which, if anything, probably, is another reason for me to put another spike on my shield and to sharpen my sword and to keep speaking out as the way that I am in defense of them. But it is a defense of Western values, Western civilization. I think that, unfortunately, there's nothing really that can be done with Thomas Massie, simply because they're committed to a struggle against him, and he's going to use every trick to stay alive, and he should. He shouldn't have to surrender his voice or what he believes or stand down just because he's being bullied by an institution that I think has its flaws. I'm not an AIPAC fan, and I'm not a big fan of any lobby group for the most part, but to the extent that they are American citizens, they have free speech too, and Citizens United codified that in the law. But Ian, I think it's a dark time, and that's why I'm saying these things and having these conversations, because my hope is that if we turtle up now, if we shield up now, and start to put on the armor of God, if you will, then we sharpen our swords of righteousness. Then I think that there are many battles that their tides have turned at the last moment because a keen, irate minority were not content to sit back. So they'll have to, from what I understand of how the Jews fight, they'll have to go for total extermination. Otherwise, if you leave any of the Jews left, they will come back and they will fight and they will win. And I admire that in them. So good for them. But it does require us to learn a little bit of the arts of war and maybe even to have been there. Yeah. To sort of to have the scope that's required to stand for these things.
So I know we're coming up against when we both have to go off and do other things, talking to other issues. So the last thing I wanted to ask you is kind of to bring it back to the beginning, the idea of the no enemies on the right stuff, the rise of the conspiracy thought, not just in libertarianism, but the entire right wing. Like the most high profile right wingers that I see online right now, they are pushing conspiracy after conspiracy after conspiracy. What do you think the answer is here for people like you and me and people online and people in our movement who care about the truth? They care about the truth more than whatever winning means. What do you think the answer is here? Because I'm constantly looking, and sometimes I feel more positive, but I see the pace that these lies can move and how they outpace the truth every single time. It worries me. So I would love just to end things on hopefully a positive.
You know what you need? You need more Stephen Miller Jews.
Yeah.
You need more. That's what you need. You need more Jews like yourself, and more good, solid, right-wing, conservative, rock-ribbed American Jews. That's what you need. And you know what you need? Honestly, we need Hollywood back. Right? We've outsourced. If the Jews that controlled Hollywood are gone, Hollywood's overrun by woke leftist Antifa people. So if we need more Steven Spielbergs, to be quite honest, we need more Steven Spielberg is a Jew who made a movie about a man named Indiana Jones, who in his final crusade saves the Holy Grail, makes a pledge to his Christian God and to his faith, and capture the imagination and intention of all Americans and people around the world. So it's a tall order. I get there's Steven Spielbergs aren't to be found on every corner, but you need people who can sort of, I think, tell the Jewish story and how it is inextricably intertwined with Western civilization. That would apply to someone like myself, but I think a lot of people are trying to divorce the Judeo from the Judeo-Christian standpoint right now. And probably you need warriors who can stand against that as well.
Trying every day, and I know you are too. So I really appreciate your voice in this.
I'm not even Jewish or Christian, but
and yet you're saying things that we agree with. Shocking.
I can't help myself. I just, for some reason, I open my mouth and the truth falls out, despite the fact that I'm going to lose even more friends if I have any left. I've got you, Ian.
There's always me. There's always me to the bitter end. Austin, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. Can't wait to talk more on these things.
Thank you.